The room smells like paper and old bindings, not the comfortable smell of a bookshelf at home. The formal smell of preservation. The kind of smell that tells you the things in this room have been handled with care. I was not looking for Jesus. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I was sitting in the rare books reading room at the university library, working through Roman administrative documents from the 1st century. Provincial records, census fragments, imperial correspondence from the territories of the Eastern Mediterranean. The kind of material most people never look at because most people are not trying to understand how Rome managed its distant problems. The librarian brought me the Loeb Classical Library edition of Tacitus's Annals Volume 15. Latin on the left page, English on the right. I needed it for a different section. Book 15 covers the reign of Nero, and I was tracking the administrative response to the Great Fire of Rome in the year 64 CE. I found the section I needed, and then I kept reading. Book 15, Chapter 44. I read it twice before I set the book down. Then I sat there for a moment and looked at the window on the far wall. Then I took out my legal pad. I still use a legal pad for research, old habit from teaching. And I wrote 3 words: hostile, witness, confirmed. I want to explain why. My name is Nathan. I spent 12 years teaching history at a Catholic high school in Indiana. Before I started teaching, I spent a semester auditing courses at a local university and made a friend who eventually went to law school. We stayed in touch. He became a defense attorney. One evening, probably 15 years ago, we were sitting in his kitchen and he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "In any trial, the most credible witness is the one who does not want to testify in your favor. A friendly witness has reasons to support you. A hostile witness has every reason to hurt you. When a hostile witness accidentally confirms something about your case, when they let something slip while trying to do something entirely different, that confirmation carries more weight than 10 people who showed up specifically to speak on your behalf, because the hostile witness had nothing to gain from confirming it. They were not protecting you. They were doing something else entirely. And in the margins of what they were actually trying to document, something slipped through. I thought about that framework for a long time before I understood what it meant for the documents sitting on the table in front of me. The men who killed Jesus left records. Their historians wrote about him. Their governors documented his followers. None of them were believers. None of them had anything to gain from making him look divine. And what they wrote, sitting in libraries for centuries, never hidden, never suppressed, is nothing like what you would expect. Tacitus was not writing about Jesus. He was writing about Nero. Specifically, he was explaining how the emperor handled the public relations disaster of the Great Fire of Rome in the year 64 CE. Rome burned. A third of the city was destroyed. People were angry and suspicious. Nero needed someone to blame. He chose the Christians, a group his contemporaries regarded as members of a foreign superstition with no respectable tradition behind them. Tacitus writes all of this with the practiced contempt of a Roman senator, explaining why the lower classes are always causing some kind of trouble. Here is the passage. Book 15, Chapter 44. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things horrible or shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Read that carefully. Tacitus calls Christianity a mischievous superstition. He calls Judea the first source of the evil. He calls Rome the place where all things horrible and shameful find their center. He is not trying to confirm Jesus. He is not writing this for Christians. He is explaining to a Roman audience why Nero's scapegoating strategy had a certain credibility to it. He is saying in the voice of a man who considers himself culturally superior to everything east of Italy. Of course, people believed this superstition. That sort of thing always starts in Judea and then infects Rome. And in the middle of that aristocratic contempt, almost incidentally, he places Jesus in history, an executed man, under Tiberius, at the hands of a procurator named Pontius Pilatus. written with the certainty of a historian recording an administrative fact. Robert Van Voorst, a professor at Western Theological Seminary and author of Jesus Outside the New Testament, published by Eerdmans in 2000, documents the scholarly consensus precisely. This passage is universally accepted as authentic, not because it is flattering to Christianity, because no Christian would have written it. No one in the 2nd century who believed in Jesus would have called his movement a mischievous superstition. No believer would have called Judea the first source of an evil. No Christian scribe adding a forgery would have described their faith spreading through Rome the way that all horrible and shameful things spread there. A forger writing in support of Jesus would have produced something completely different. This is the hostile witness. Tacitus did not want to confirm Jesus. He was explaining why Rome caught fire, and in the margins of that political crisis, he placed Pontius Pilate and an executed man from Judea in the permanent historical record, without meaning to, without caring, without any of the theological weight that later centuries would attach to that single paragraph. You have seen Romans in movies, marble columns, white togas, men with perfect diction speaking in resonant tones about empire and destiny and the eternal city. That is not what Tacitus sounds like. Tacitus sounds like a bureaucrat who is tired of explaining why people from the eastern provinces keep disrupting the capital. He mentions Jesus the way a senator might mention a regional outbreak of some agricultural pest that has spread to the city gardens. The way a magistrate documents an administrative problem in the provinces that has unfortunately become an imperial problem. There is no theology in Tacitus, no miracle, no resurrection, no divine claim, no interest whatsoever in who Jesus was or what he taught. Just an executed troublemaker from Judea whose followers refused to stop multiplying. And that administrative indifference, that complete absence of religious investment, is precisely what makes the testimony credible. Tacitus was not arguing about the resurrection. He could not have cared less. He was trying to explain Nero's decision-making in the summer of 64. The fact that Jesus appears in that explanation, named, dated, attached to a specific Roman official, in a document written by a man who despised everything he was describing. That is the hostile witness confirming what he had no reason to confirm. When I read it in that rare books room, I understood something I had been circling for years without finding the language for. The most important confirmation is the accidental one. Now I need to tell you about a man who was torturing people, methodically, legally, on behalf of the Roman emperor. His name was Pliny the Younger. He was the governor of the Roman province of Bithynia Pontus in what is now northern Turkey. Around the year 112 CE, approximately 80 years after the crucifixion, he encountered a large population of Christians in his province and did not know what to do with them. He had been arresting them, interrogating them, executing those who refused to recant, but the legal framework was unclear. Was the name itself a crime? Or did crimes need to be attached to the name? He wrote to the Emperor Trajan to ask. The letter is Letter 1096. Pliny describes his procedure in careful administrative detail. He arrested people accused of being Christians. He asked each one, 3 times with formal warnings, whether they were in fact members of this group. Those who said yes and refused to deny it, he executed. Those who denied it were released on the condition that they cursed the name of Christ and offered incense to a statue of the emperor. But Pliny was also investigating the specific allegations against Christians, because the rumors were serious: ritual crimes, secret meetings, cannibalism. So he interrogated further, including, he writes, 2 women who served as deaconesses, whom he had tortured to extract their testimony. And here is what he found. The Christians he questioned described their meetings as follows. They would assemble before dawn on a fixed day. They would sing hymns to Christ as to a god. Then they would bind themselves by an oath, not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not to deny a trust when called upon to honor it. Then they would disperse. And later in the day they would reconvene and eat together. Pliny writes that the food was promiscuum et inoxium, ordinary, harmless. That detail exists because Pliny was specifically investigating the cannibalism allegations. He tortured 2 women to find out what Christians ate. He found ordinary food. Trajan wrote back, letter 10, 97. Trajan tells Pliny, do not seek Christians out, do not accept anonymous accusations. But if someone is formally denounced and refuses to recant, prosecute them. This is the first Roman imperial policy document on Christians, written approximately 80 years after the crucifixion. It mentions Jesus as a figure whose name these people were being executed for refusing to deny, without any interest in who Jesus was. Administrative notation, nothing more. Imagine being summoned before the governor, not for something you did, for something you believe. You are brought in and asked once. You understand the weight of the question. The governor looks at you with the patience of a man who has done this many times this month. He will ask again. You look at the door. You look at the 2 women who were questioned before you, the ones whose testimony Pliny recorded in his letter. He asks again. The 3rd time there is no more patience in his voice, just procedure. Pliny documented that some people said no, that some people renounced the name and went home, that others refused. He executed the ones who refused. He filed a careful report. He was not cruel in any exceptional way. He was not trying to destroy a faith, he was managing a jurisdiction. That is what makes his letter so difficult to read. The people being executed in letter 10, 96 were not dying at the hands of a fanatic. They were dying at the hands of an administrator who wrote thorough, well-organized reports to his emperor and waited politely for instructions. The singing before dawn, the ordinary food, the refusal, some of them, to say the name did not matter. Pliny documented all of it and sent it off and went to bed. Now let me tell you about the passage everyone cites, the famous one, the one that appears in every mainstream argument for Jesus' historical existence outside the New Testament. The passage by the Jewish historian Josephus, written around the year 93 CE. Antiquities of the Jews. Book 18, Chapter 3, Section 3. Here is how most editions print it. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He was the Christ. And when Pilate had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the 3rd day. That passage is called the Testimonium Flavianum, and there is a serious problem with it. Josephus was a Pharisee who spent his career as a historian employed by Rome, a man who never converted to Christianity, and yet the passage says, if it be lawful to call him a man, and he was the Christ, and he appeared to them alive again the 3rd day. A 1st century Pharisee working for Rome would not write those sentences. Here is the evidence that pushes this from suspicion to near certainty. Origen of Alexandria was one of the most important theologians in early Christianity. In his work against Celsus, written around the year 248 CE, Origen cites Josephus and notes, almost in passing, that Josephus did not believe Jesus was the Messiah. Think about what this means. Origen read Josephus in the year 248. He concluded Josephus did not believe Jesus was the Messiah. But the Testimonium Flavianum, as we have it, says, he was the Christ. If that phrase had been there when Origen read it, Origen could not have drawn that conclusion. The phrase was not there yet. Sometime between the mid-3rd century and the manuscripts appearing in the 4th, someone added it. Someone who was supposed to be copying. Louis Feldman of Yeshiva University spent decades on the textual problem. His conclusion, the Testimonium Flavianum, as we have it, is a substantially altered version of a shorter, neutral passage Josephus almost certainly wrote. The phrases about divinity, the Christ, the resurrection, those are from someone else's pen, and the Church has been quoting this forged version for centuries as its primary external evidence for Jesus, which tells you something about the institutional relationship to its own sources. And yet, there is a second Josephus passage, one that almost no scholar disputes. Antiquities of the Jews, Book 20, Chapter 9, Section 1. Josephus is describing a specific political episode, The high priest Ananus has taken advantage of a gap between Roman governors to convene an illegal assembly and execute several men. Josephus writes, almost in passing, as a way of identifying one of the victims. He assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others. That is it. No theology, no divine claim, no resurrection. Just a historian identifying James by reference to his brother. John P. Meyer, a Catholic priest and New Testament scholar at Notre Dame, assessed this passage precisely. It is almost certainly authentic. The reason is the structure of the reference itself. Josephus is telling Ananus' story. Jesus appears in one phrase, only to identify James. There is no theological investment, no reason to invent, no reason to embellish. A historian who needed to identify which James he was talking about would naturally refer to a more famous brother. And if Jesus were not a known figure in Josephus's world, the reference would not work as an identification. You do not identify someone by reference to an unknown. The incidental passage confirms, without meaning to, that Jesus was a known enough figure in first-century Jewish memory, that naming him was sufficient to identify his brother. That accidental confirmation is more valuable than the celebrated passage that was edited. The one they touched tells you what they needed it to say. The one they left alone tells you what was actually there. Think about that for a second. The most quoted passage, the one the Church has cited for centuries, was altered. The one that survives untouched is 3 lines about a high priest killing the wrong man. And those 3 lines, precisely because no one thought they needed editing, contain more historical weight than everything the scribes added. The hostile witness, unguarded, is always more valuable than the friendly witness who prepared their statement. Josephus did not know those 3 lines would matter more than the polished passage someone built around them. But Josephus is not the only hostile source. He is just the most quoted. Suetonius was a Roman historian and court official under the Emperor Hadrian. In his Lives of the 12 Caesars, writing around the year 121 CE, he documents the expulsion of Jews from Rome under the Emperor Claudius. He writes, "Since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he expelled them from Rome. The year of that expulsion is approximately 49 CE. Chrestus, not Christus. A common Latin spelling variation for the Greek word Christos. Bart Ehrman in Did Jesus Exist?, published by Harper One in 2012, notes that most scholars cautiously accept the identification. If Christus means Christus, this passage documents disruptions in Rome traced to the followers of Jesus approximately 16 years after the crucifixion. Not a confirmation of Jesus's theology, not a confirmation of the resurrection. A documentation of the administrative problem his movement was causing in the capital of the empire. Which is exactly how Rome would have noticed. They would not have noticed a resurrection. They would have noticed the arguments. Then there is a figure most people have never heard of, Mara bar Serapion, a Syrian Stoic philosopher writing from Roman captivity to his son, probably in the late 1st century, though scholars debate the exact date. He lists 3 historical injustices that he considers representative of the treatment of wise men by their own people. Athens killed Socrates. Samos burned Pythagoras. The Jews executed their wise king. He adds, not long after, their kingdom was abolished. He does not know Jesus' name. He calls him only the wise king. He treats him as equivalent to Socrates, a philosopher unjustly killed by the people he led. No theology, no divine claim, no resurrection narrative. F. Bruce in Jesus and Christian Origins Outside the New Testament, published by Hodder and Stoughton in 1974, identifies Mara bar Serapion as one of the earliest potentially datable references to Jesus' execution outside Christian sources. A Stoic philosopher in Roman captivity, writing to his son about the costs of killing wise men, treating Jesus as a philosopher executed for his ideas. He had no interest in Christian theology. He just knew that something had happened. And then Lucian of Samosata, a pagan satirist writing around the year 165 CE. In a work called The Death of Peregrinus, he mocks Christians for their credulity. He describes Jesus as the man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. He calls him a crucified sophist. He is contemptuous. He finds the Christians naive and gullible for following the teachings of someone who was executed for starting trouble. But in the act of mocking them, Lucian confirms the crucifixion, the location, and the centrality of one figure to the entire movement. He confirms all of that without caring about any of it, because he was making a joke at someone else's expense. I want you to stop for a moment and look at what we have. No one I have described was on your side. Tacitus thought Christianity was a destructive plague spreading through the empire from a corrupt source in Judea. Pliny was methodically torturing people to find out if they were criminals and reporting the results to the emperor. Josephus was a Pharisee employed by Rome who never converted and never believed Jesus was the Messiah. Suetonius was documenting an expulsion ordered to manage urban unrest. Mara bar Serapion was a Stoic philosopher in captivity who did not know the man's name. Lucian was a satirist who thought the whole thing was absurd. None of them were protecting Jesus. None of them were trying to validate anything. None of them had any interest in the theological questions that would come to define Western civilization. And collectively, without coordinating, without intending to, they left a trail. An executed man in Judea, under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, a movement that spread through the provinces and reached Rome within a generation. Communities meeting before dawn, eating ordinary food, singing to the man whose name the governor wanted them to deny. A wise king whose followers kept multiplying after his death. None of them wanted to confirm that. They were putting out fires. They were managing jurisdictions. They were mocking naive believers. And in the margins of all of that, something got through. You have probably been told that the evidence for Jesus comes from the Gospels, from Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. Friendly sources. Sources with every reason to confirm the man they believed in. But the hostile witnesses are worth more. They had nothing to gain. They confirmed it anyway. And that trail, the administrative record left by people who thought Christianity was a problem to be managed, says something the Gospels alone could never say. It was not invented by his followers. Something happened in Judea, and it was significant enough that the empire noticed. J.J. Benítez spent 40 years with these sources, not just with the Gospels, not just with the sacred texts and the Gnostic scrolls, with the Roman administrative record, with the hostile historians, with the Stoic philosophers and the pagan satirists, and the governors writing policy memos about people who ate ordinary food. His phrase for these documents, the one that stayed with me from the first time I read it, is administrative shadows. The Romans did not write about Jesus because they cared about Jesus. They wrote about him the way they wrote about floods and outbreaks and regional unrest in distant territories that eventually became imperial problems. He was, to the Roman administrative mind, an entry in the column of things requiring management, a checkmark next to Judea, a note in the correspondence from Bithynia Pontus, a sentence in an explanation of why Nero blamed someone for a fire. Administrative shadows, no glory, no theology, no awareness of what they were accidentally documenting. Benítez's conclusion after 4 decades is specific, and I think important. The Church has quoted these hostile sources for centuries as external evidence for Jesus' historical existence. They cite Tacitus, they cite Josephus. They present these texts as secular confirmation of what the Gospels teach. And they are right that these texts confirm something, but they rarely quote the full sentence. Because the full sentence calls Christianity a destructive superstition. Because the full sentence calls Judea the first source of an evil. Because the full passage describes a governor torturing people to find out if they were criminals and finding ordinary food. The evidence is real. It is also devastating. And the institution learned somewhere in its long history to cite the part that helps and leave aside the part that stings. Both parts are the same document, sitting in a library, never hidden, never suppressed, just only ever partially quoted. Benítez called this the deepest irony of the external evidence. The most powerful confirmation of Jesus' historical existence comes from people who considered his movement a contagion, who tortured his followers, expelled them from cities, mocked them as naive, documented them as a problem. And in doing all of that, they confirmed more than they intended. I drove back to Evansville in the late afternoon. The Loeb Tacitus was back on the shelf in the rare books room. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started the engine. I thought about my friend the defense attorney and the thing he had said 15 years ago. The most credible witness is the one who does not want to testify in your favor. Not one of those men wanted to confirm Jesus. They were explaining politics, filing policy memos, telling someone else's story, writing to their sons from captivity, making jokes. Every single one of them was doing something else entirely. And in the margins of what they were actually trying to document, something slipped through. I looked at the 3 words on my legal pad. Hostile. Witness. Confirmed. The argument for Jesus' historical existence does not rest primarily on the people who loved him. It rests on the people who thought he was a problem. They were not protecting him. They were not even thinking about him. And in not thinking about him, they confirmed him. Because the most credible confirmation is the one nobody meant to give. I started the engine. The 3 words stayed in the bag. You decide what to do with this.